Hey, it's Ed. Welcome to the very first edition of My Mentor. Literally made up that name in this channel about 5 minutes before I hit the record button because I was just talking with someone and people are always asking me questions about their careers and next steps and how to do this, that, or the other. And I don't have the ability to scale myself and to work with a lot of different people, although I love to do it. So I thought, why not just give it all away? And whatever the hot topics are that come my way related to mentoring, I'm going to share them because here's the truth. I don't have anything original. Everything I'm going to pour out in my mentoring is something that's been poured into me. And that's one of the fundamental principles that I don't think most people understand and lay hold of and make happen. And that is the more you give yourself, the more you receive. So I always picture like a jug of water being poured into you. Now, a lot of people, they get some water and they hold on to it. And for dear life, oh my gosh, they are not going to let go of that water because what happens if the water goes away? What happens if they use all the water? They're certainly not going to share any of the water. And so this philosophy becomes ingrained in everything they do. And these people are typically pretty unhappy. And they would never articulate it like I'm talking to you now, but that's exactly what happens. And so instead of this abundance mentality, it's a poverty mentality. And you see it doesn't matter how much money you have, you see poverty mentality in rich people. You see abundance mentality in people who don't have as many resources. So that's really key. Wasn't really part of what I want to talk about in this first episode, but it just made me think that I'm so thankful for all my mentors. And, that's probably how I should start is tell you really quickly, and I'm sure I'll cover it more in more detail at some other episode. But someone, a mentor, suggested to me I should have mentors. And I took it super serious to where I did some research and found out that effective mentoring relationships are formal. So I formalized these relationships and it ended up for me, and it was kind of a best practice when I researched it 30 years ago, not maybe it's morphed somewhat since then, but I found it very effective still today. I had a one-page contract, like literal contract with these people. So I'd ask them, hey, would you be my mentor? Okay, I'm going way too deep on this topic. But essentially, I'll come back to that in another episode. That's what I did. And one of those people said, you should always have a mentor. And so everything I'm sharing with you came from someone else. They poured into me. And then I learned, as hard as it was, that as that person's pouring that jug of water into me, I need to be pouring it into someone else. And I've always done that. And I've always had mentees while I've been mentored. So that's how it really works. But I want to talk about branding. All right. So this is always kind of a controversial topic, sort of taboo sometimes. Like, you shouldn't be concerned about your brand. I went through that. I remember, I can't name organizations because I never want people pointing back at them, or I never want those people to feel bad. But there was one organization in particular, they hated the fact that I was coming into the organization and I was already known external to the organization. So I had a brand. And they were super threatened by that. And they even formed a council. We called them the Four Horsemen of this particular organization, but they formed a council, these four people. They became the Ethics Council of some name like that. I think they made it sound a little softer, a little nicer, but that's essentially what it was. And so I asked them, I said, well, when's the last time you convened? And they never had. And I was like, do you have minutes of previous meetings? They've never met. They got together because they always felt like they were the four sort of watch persons over the organization, make sure no one came in and ruffled things up. And so that's what I was beating my head against the entire time I was there. And I loved the organization. So I stayed for a long time. But man, they made it really difficult. And I'll never forget one time where, I mean, they were chastising me like, you cannot do this. You cannot go and speak. You cannot write. You cannot be written about. I mean, it was crazy because, and it was funny because when I was recruited to the organization, I had never heard of them. And they're a sizable organization. I was like, how is that possible that an organization so big in such a big community is unknown beyond the community. Well, I found out why, because they were very restrictive, very protective. And I understand the thinking. I don't agree with it at all, but I understand the thinking. So, and we're going to hit that here when I talk about branding. So it was very difficult, but here's the funniest of them all, the situations. I had so many, but I know that's not the point. But I'll give you one. So I got called in to the deputy, what was his title? Legal counsel. And he was one of the 4 horse people. And he called me in his office. I was like, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? And I all these things going through my brain. I mean, I was so paranoid. I was like, oh my gosh, what did I do? What did I do? What did I do? And I had done an interview for a magazine. And in that magazine, I made sure that it was all about my organization, nothing to do with me. I mean, if you were to find that article today, it's like, we're an awesome organization. Look at all our statistics and look how we take care of people in our community. We do these great things. And what great people and great teams. Not once was there anything about, oh, I'm like the best person ever. Nothing about me at all. And he was printing, of course, printing something off. He was printing a copy of the article. And then he just came over. I was sitting at his desk, waiting. He's like, throws it down on his desk and it goes flying up everywhere, all these pieces of paper. And I'm like, my heart rate is up because, I try to be a really good person and try to follow all the different rules and policies and stuff. And that, I was like, oh my gosh, what on earth did I do? And then I was like, well, show me. Then he started explaining. He was very emotional. I was like, well, show me what concerns you. And it was like, fine. I went and talked to the marketing people. The marketing people were so glad. They're saying, Ed, you're a breath of fresh air. This is what we need. We need people out there who are willing to talk about the great things our organization does. So you'll encounter people like that still today, especially with social media. And that was the other thing too. Back then, I mean, I was creating these social media channels to brand our organization. I was like, how come we're not on Twitter? How come we're not on LinkedIn? How come we're not reviewing Yelp? How come we're not doing this and that and the other? It was amazing. And so finally, we started to do that. And eventually I was able to give those things back to marketing where they really belonged. But I was glad to have helped the organization start them. And it's just funny that way. So it's the same when it comes to the personal brand. People give you a hard time about it. And here's the deal. We all have a brand. Okay. So if there's 2 or 3 key points, here's point number 1. The sub point, because I don't want you to forget it, is to pour out on other people. And as you pour out yourself, there's more coming in. So never worry about that. But the point here is you do have a brand. And if you do not control that brand, someone else is, and they probably don't have your best intent in mind, right? Why would they? So they're going to create a narrative about you that's probably not accurate and probably not fair. So you've got to be your brand boss. And there's some ways of doing it. I'm going to talk about it. The second point is I'm going to give you some safeguards. And there's a couple that I developed with some friends. Again, I say I developed. They were poured into me by somebody. And that I found them good to help me in my career since that time. And so I'm gonna head into those 2 things. And then I'm going to give you a few things you can do to build your brand. So one of the safeguards is to ask yourself, who does this benefit? Is this benefiting me as a person or my organization? I always default to the organization. So, obviously you want benefit for yourself as you build your brand, but never do it overshadowing your organization. So also at this organization, I had another friend who was in a similar situation as me, but he wasn't as bold, but he followed my lead and watched me get slapped around a little bit and open up doors, and he followed quickly behind. But we would use each other. And so it's always great if you've got someone like this in the workplace and in life in general, who's going to be a truth teller to you and unafraid to tell you things that might be hard to say otherwise, disagree with you, those sort of things. But we always had this litmus test. And the litmus test was, who is this benefiting the most? Is it the organization or you? If the answer was you, we didn't do it. So sometimes it was really close. We took the high road or a conservative road and said, no, we're not going to do it. And that served us well. We both went on and did really well in our careers, and in our personal brands are still as strong as others. So it worked really well. And we'd watch someone else in the industry. Here's a bonus one. So this is not the next one, but here's like a bonus one I just thought of. You'll find a couple people in the industry, it's all about them. I mean, it is all about them. It's not even close. And so we would ask ourselves, the other thing we kind of had fun with this, like, hey, is that I'm not going to mention the person's name, but is that a blank blank? And if we thought that was a blank blank move, we were like, no way, don't do it. So, and I know the line's kind of gray, but if there's any doubt, just go with caution and don't do it. But if it's clear that it's benefiting the organization, go ahead and do it. All right. So that was one of our good sort of governors, if you will. And another one is it serving someone? So is it serving someone? And I challenge myself with this still today. Me creating this YouTube channel, is it for me? So I could say, hey, look, I've got, 13 views today, or 13 likes, or am I trying to serve someone else? Always a good question. And again, if you've got, and I hope you do, confidants in your life that are willing to speak truth to you, test these things out. Say, hey, I'm thinking about doing X, Y, Z. What are your thoughts? And then really listen and be a really good listener. And that'll help you as well. So those are some good governors or safeguards that you can utilize to help you make sure that you're doing the right thing when it comes to, the illusion of self-promotion. Okay, I do have a PowerPoint. Of course you have a PowerPoint. And I'm going to bring it up here and square it off. There we go. All right. So 2 slides. Brand or be branded, our topic. And I already covered this first part, right? You have a brand, you know what it is. So you should ask yourself that question as you're listening. What is your brand? Write it down. And if you don't know it, what do you think it might be? And then determine your brand. So what do you want it to be? And if you're one of those listening and say, I don't need a brand, I just let my performance do it. No, you have a brand, and it's probably not flattering. So I don't want to hear that as an excuse. So do it. Just write down, jot it, something down. What would you want your value proposition to be? What do you want to be known for? For me, for a long time, it was really about leveraging technology to save lives. And it hasn't changed for me, right? I know that that's my ultimate purpose from a career standpoint, why I'm created and why I was given the skills and talents that I do have, was to leverage technology to save people's lives. I saw it early on in my life and in my career, and I've been hell-bent on that trajectory since then. So almost everything is sort of centered on making that happen. So why do I care about my mentoring? Because I can't scale. No one can scale themselves. One is too small a number for greatness. So you have to share with others and raise other leaders and let them do things far beyond what you're capable of doing. So what is your value proposition? And it's not going to be grandiose for everyone. For some, it just may be serving, and which is cool, which is the greatest one of all. So don't be intimidated, or don't not do this because you don't think you've got this big thing, because you're touching one person's life. That's a big deal. So really give thought to this about brand. We'll say, and some ways of getting at it. What is your differentiator? What is different about you? We're all uniquely made. And, what specialization do you have based on your training, experience, all that kind of stuff? And then just work on making it better all the time. And then, kind of my main point here. So some of these things are going to be kind of hard and people will be like mad at me, which is okay. But if you're not interesting, people won't be interested in you. So when you think about your brand, sometimes you need to be interesting, not all the time. Like I said, it's fair that some people will find their niche to be something that some might consider small, but it's not small because it's touching at least one person. It makes a big difference in the universe. So don't let people tell you about small thinking or anything like that, because I think it's all valid. If you think about my mom as an example, some might think, well, what did she do, or what was her brand? But man, she raised 7 kids that have done amazing things in this world, and she was uneducated, and poor and, grew up fatherless, all, as bad as things can get. And yet, what a legacy she has made. And now there's like, I forget the number, like I think it's over 30 grandkids and they're having kids. So amazing legacy. Anyways, so my mom's brand was, man, she was the matriarch for the Marx family. That's a pretty bodacious thing if you knew about my brothers and sisters. Anyways, improve it constantly, but be interesting. So where I got lost there is not everyone will be interesting, and that's fine. But to the extent you can, this is like an accelerator here, is be interesting. So do interesting things, or have things that people will be interested in knowing about or learning about. Okay, how do you build a brand? First and foremost, you have to create value. How do you create value? Well, there's a lot of different ways, and I don't claim to know everything. This is just what I've learned from others pouring into me. You could probably go to AI right now and write this up and get something similar and maybe some new things. But my experience has shown me that these have proven true. Blogs, books, and don't care about how many people are reading your blog or buying your books or listening to podcasts or participating in a webinar. It all builds over time and on your brand. So of course, with rare exceptions, right? We'll hear about those rare exceptions. With rare exceptions, it's just years upon years upon years. 10,000 hours, Malcolm Gladwell, Beatles, oh, they just showed up and suddenly they were the greatest band ever. No, they spent 10,000 hours in Hamburg, Germany, in clubs every single night for hours playing their music and fine-tuning their craft. So that's what happens. You do these blogs, books, podcasts. It's the same thing with our podcast. Probably had a couple listeners the first couple podcasts, and now we're almost at 200 podcasts that have been released. We're way over that in recordings, and it's top 5% in the world. So it just takes time and consistency. And I find if you leverage a lot of different ways of creating value, you create value. So if you just pick one, it may work, but if you pick multiple ways, you increase your odds quite a bit. Social media. So you have to embrace social. And a lot of people, it's kind of funny, kind of in my age group. So I'm either in the top end of Gen X or the very bottom of baby boomers. I like to say Gen X just because it makes me feel a little bit younger, but I'm right there. And a lot of my colleagues and my brothers and sisters who are above me, so they're definitely baby boomers, they don't particularly have an affinity for social media. They don't get it. They don't understand it. They don't, they get mad at me sometimes because why are you putting stuff about our family, And so they don't get it typically. But you need to, right, to be contemporary and have a brand, you need to leverage social media. So there's different things. I'm sure I'm missing some, like TikTok. But there's IG, there's X, there's LinkedIn, YouTube. From a professional point of view, those are probably the main ones. There's other ones, of course, but those and watch for new ones that might emerge. Right, LinkedIn even 5 years ago wasn't all that, and now it's like pretty main source for people. YouTube channels gaining more and more popularity. Right, you don't have to do these webinars anymore that require a lot of infrastructure. Basically, do them on your own, like I do. And then, do you have your own website? And so that's something else you can do as well. So those are different techniques. Okay, say yes. So when people ask you to speak, say yes. When people ask you to mentor them, say yes. When people ask you to talk, say yes. I've done this so much. I cannot even know. I don't even know how to count the amount of times. And it pays back. Now, that's not the reason to do it so that someone owes you. Pays back. I don't remember the people typically until I run into them again a few years later, or I find like an old message on LinkedIn. Oh my gosh, 15 years ago, this person asked me for this favor and I did it. And you look, now they're CIO. So it's really important. But always give back. So whatever people pour into you, so this is the one thing that kills me. So every once in a while, when I do get kind of like jaded, this is the thing that gets me jaded. I've helped a lot of people. There's one person in particular that's most recent comes to mind. And again, I won't name the person or name the organization because you'll all figure it out. I helped that person become who they are today. Not because I did anything great, but I just opened doors. I was even their reference for the job that they got that propelled them. They were sort of in a state of mediocrity for years and years and years. No one wanted to take them to that next level, take a chance because they were just sort of mediocre, but great credentials. And so, I helped them, and then I became that reference call. Kind of, I could see where he could go. And that's how I answered the reference questions. And so they decided to give him the position. Now he's like this big wig, mucky yuck. He won't even talk to me. It's just bizarre human behavior. But as sometimes I do get jaded, but I always remember that's an outlier. Keep pouring yourself out. So do that. So if someone pours into you, pour out. And if someone doesn't pour into you, pour out, and then someone will. All right. I think I've reinforced that point a lot. Okay. So say yes. I don't want to speak. I'm shy. No, speak. Someone needs you to speak. Go speak for them. And again, someone reaches out to you. So my rule was I always, and I still do it today, except sales. Like I would always ask him, look, if you're trying to sell me something, you just be honest and tell me, because I'm going to tell you no, because I don't want to be sold. I don't have the time for it, and I'm not the right person. But if you're genuinely looking for some advice, I will take that call. I do it so often still today. Okay. Volunteer. Okay. Remember we talked about be interesting? Volunteer and gain new experiences. So it could be for professional organizations, advisory boards, right? How many vendors have advisory boards and they ask you to be on it? Just say yes, because you're going to learn and you're going to give back and you're going to meet other people there, and it builds your brand. So that's how you do it. I have a decent brand, and it didn't come from being shy and not saying yes to opportunities and not creating value. I did all these things that I'm talking about here. So I'm not talking theory. I did all these, and I still do all these today. Volunteer at a hospital, volunteer nonprofits. That's where you get the stories, man. If you've heard me speak, I can tell you some gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching stories. Anyone can do this. That's the other thing. I'm too busy. Oh my gosh. I'll give you two really quick examples. So yeah, I'm busy too. All right. So I met up with my oldest son. I did this with my daughter as well. The oldest son, I met him every day after school, every Wednesday after school. And we met at the hospital. So it was around 4 p.m. So my work day was sort of winding down. But we spent a couple hours together as volunteers. And it was a bonding experience for us, time together for us, then we drove home together and all that kind of stuff. And then, but the experiences that we had, tear jerkers. And then the other time, the last time I volunteered in hospital was I served at the Cleveland Clinic, and every week I took 1 hour, I called it my lunch hour. And I went over to the outpatient cancer floor, and there people were receiving sort of the outpatient cancer medications, and I would just chat with them, and the stories, oh my gosh, and then it would just break your heart every time and remind you why you do what you do. And so I'm only sharing these to tell you, don't give me any BS excuses why you don't do it. Anyone can do it. You can include your kids. All right, do cool things and leverage your employer as much as you can doing them. So I don't know, cool things like maybe do a podcast. Ask your employer, hey, employer, we don't do podcasts. I would love to be the host of a podcast that showcases, the best people that we have at this organization or the best clinical outcomes that we have. I'm sure they'll say yes. Try different things. Create associations. So we did that during the pandemic. As chief digital officers, we're kind of emerging. There was really nothing out there for chief digital officers. It was all CIO or CIO organizations that would add the word CDO to it. And we're like, nah. So we created our own CDO organization. So I got with 13 of the preeminent CDOs in the country, and we developed this association. We had a few conferences, all virtual, again, during pandemic. And as the pandemic started to wind down, other professional organizations were kind of getting it and providing more value. So we really didn't need to do it anymore. So we was like, hey, this was a good 2-year run, but we're going to disband. So, but that was a cool thing. I met so many cool people and so great content. So these are different things that you can do. And the force multiplier, it's just serve others. So if you do everything with this sort of clean heart and serve others, everything else will work out. Yeah, you're going to take, hopefully it's not as extreme as the example I gave you of the organization where I served. It's a very good organization and very good people, and they were very well intended. So it's nothing negative, but just reality. You might run into that sometimes, maybe, maybe not, but it's all worth it because you do need to take care of your brand. Because if you don't, you're leaving it in the hands of someone else. And again, they're not going to have the same intent that you do. And then, finally, when you don't have a brand, you have to ask yourself about your identity. What is your identity? It is similar to brand. And so, except we might have a different brand, in the workplace, but ultimately it all boils down to identity. And so that's another thing people haven't grasped is their identity. So they really struggle with brand because they don't even know who they are. And again, if you're listening, watching, and that's you, that's okay. It's nothing bad. It's probably where 95% of the population is. But just be cognizant of it and start working on it. Like, dang, what is my identity? It's not work. Can't be work. So it's got to be something else much, much deeper. And once you grasp your identity, why are you here? Why were you created? Then the brand is a lot easier.